Hi there everyone, it's Joe, welcome back to my channel, and for those of you who are worried that despite the fact that this channel is diverging to include more things that I was going to not do as much Final Fantasy TCG content, then you are wrong, because I will definitely want to support this game as much as I possibly can, and this time round I want to bring you a new deck list which is going to include 0 legends. So that means that anyone that you want to introduce to the game that kind of knows a bit about it, and therefore my Starter Deck Evolved series probably is a little too simple for it, and want to take it a little bit further, then this deck is the perfect deck for you to show them. And it's Lightning Wind, and it's been doing, Lightning Wind in general has been doing very, very well over the course of Opus 4's lifespan up to this point. There were 2 top 8 decks for it in Winter Cup. It's been doing really well in Japan lately, so I wanted to show you guys how you can build this deck on a budget and a really, really low one at that, and then how you can adapt it, so if you wanted to pick up a few legends, then you can kind of add those to it. So as you can see here, this deck has 24 forwards, 18 backups, only 3 summons and 5 monsters. So going straight into the lightning portion of the forwards, we have the Alcid kind of thing, because if anyone's kind of trying to get into the game, then Alcid is a very, very popular combo. It does very, very well and has done since Opus 2. So there's 3 copies of Alcid, 3 copies of Onion Knight, and then we also have 2 copies of Black Waltz 3. I know I'm skipping Orlando, but I'll get back to him in a second. And just 1 copy of Rigdia. Now, the reason that we've got less Rigdias in here is because we have more Onion Knights, but you can kind of interchange. One of the nice things with this combo is you can run any number of Onion Knights, Rigdias, and Black Waltzes, and it just kind of work. So I don't want to go too heavily over those, because a lot of you who've watched my videos already know all about the Alcid combo, and those of you that haven't seen it before, just experiment with different ratios of these things and you'll get to grips with it very, very quickly. And then we have 3 copies of Orlando. Now Orlando is a linchpin in this deck, and he is a hero card from Opus 4 that has a massive body at 9k and tends to have the effect of destroying something when it comes into play. So it's similarly to Alcid, it's a massive swing of momentum that Lightning does very, very well at. So Orlando combos very, very well with a lot of cards in this deck, so definitely wanted 3 copies of him. And then we also have a single copy of Angeal Penance to round out kind of the lightning portion of this deck, purely because there's a lot of kind of chip damage in this deck, and Angeal Penance and Orlando both do very much the same thing, but they're just, one does it when it hits and has haste, and another one does it when it comes into play and has a bigger body. So having access to multiple different ways of doing that is a really, really good way to kind of get rid of all of your opponent's forwards in a very efficient manner. But if you were to take anything out of this deck for Legends, then Angeal Penance would probably be the first thing to go. And then going into the wind forwards, we have 3 copies of Barbariccia. Now, Barbariccia is an amazing card, because it circumvents a lot of problems that chip damage decks have, and that is in the form of things like Minwu, which mitigate any kind of damage that isn't fatal to one of your forwards. Barbariccia makes it so that any damage is fatal to your opponent's forward, so therefore it combos extremely well with anything in this deck, much in the same way that Orlando does, but with an arguably stronger effect and a slightly smaller body. So 3 copies of Barbariccia. Then we have 3 copies of Moogle, and Moogle is more just an efficiency thing than anything else. Like, it allows you to keep consistency. You're drawing cards when it comes in, you're drawing cards when it dies, and if you're blocking with it, or it's being blocked when you attack with it, then those forwards that are damaged. Therefore, Barbariccia is going to kill it, Angeal Penance is going to kill it, Orlando's going to kill it, and all the various different forms of chip damage you have might be enough to just push a Moogle over that little threshold enough to kill them as well. So it's just a really, really good value forward. Then we have 3 copies of Cane Sena. Now, the Cane Sena Seed Seer trio is a major part of my version of this deck, and the other versions I've seen, some people run the Cane Sena trio, some people run the Chocobos and Fat Chocobo, some people don't run either of them and run more sort of just value forwards. This one, because we're trying to kind of keep with the legendless thing, we're not going to run Fat Chocobo because he's a legend, and Cane Sena is a hero and she's very, very cheap. She's also very, very good. So if going over the trio themselves, you have Cane Sena, who is a 9k free, untargetable forward as long as you have her 2 backups along with her. So you have Arun Sena, which searches for either her or the other backup, which I love, and you also have Raya O Sena, which is the card that makes Cane Sena untargetable. So if you accumulate those, which is a lot easier than it sounds, then you end up with a real blockade while you're kind of going off killing all of their guys, and you have this guy that's just going to keep swinging. So I really, really like Cane Sena in this deck. And then you have 2 copies of Ishtola, primarily as an enabler, a damage enabler. So it'll do a little bit of chip damage which will allow your Barbaricis, your Orlandos, etc. to go off. But not only that, but you can also, you'd be surprised how many things you can kind of kill through chip damage if they don't have access to something like Minwu. And you know, in this deck you even have methods around that. So Ishtola gets dropped later on if you're going to be able to run Legends in this deck, but there's no reason why you couldn't keep her in if you did. She's still a very, very good card. Going into the backup section now, we have 3 copies of Black Mage because it fits this theme very, very well. It destroys the damage forward, which is something that a lot of cards in this deck do. And when we get to Cactuar, it's kind of the main enabler for everything in this deck. You have Ishtola, you have Cactuar, you have just blocking and being blocked by things like Moogle. You find that you end up with like a momentum that you build up as the game progresses, and then eventually you're just steamrolling everything that comes near you. And Black Mage aids that. Red Mage, because Red Mage goes in everything, is just really, really good. Giving your guys haste is a major, major deal. 1 Magus, because I thought that Magus could be a damage enabler, which is also a forward that can remove itself from your board without any additional costs, and it can actually kind of, be enough damage to kill something as well. 4,000 isn't a huge amount, but it's enough to kind of warrant it being there as and when you need it. Seymour, again, Murderville. This whole deck is all about killing things, so Seymour makes sense. And then you have Gramis, which is your searcher for Al Cid. You have so many targets for Al Cid in your Black Waltz, your Rigdia, and your Onion Knights that it makes sense to have a searcher for the enabler for that combo. So there's 1 Gramis in here. Going into the win backups, as I said previously, Minwu can be a real pain in the backside for this deck, so running 3 Archer in here is mandatory. Minwu's not the only really good backup in the game, and there's going to be plenty of other things that you're going to want to deal with, but Archer is a 2 CP backup. It does its job very, very well. It's a very, very niche thing that it does as well. There are many cards that blow up backups, so Archer just makes a lot of sense here. And then we have 3 copies of Aron Sena and 2 copies of Ryo Sena, and the reason I only run 2 copies of Ryo Sena is because when I play Aron Sena, the chances are I'm going to be searching up the other backup, because I think that having a backup searcher backup is very, very it's very unexplored in Final Fantasy TCG, most backups that search for forwards, so I think that having that capability aids your consistency that much and instantly sets you up ready for Kane Sena when you do draw her, because you're running 3 of her and only 2 of the other backup. And then we have 1 Dancer because it's a damage enabler that doesn't target. And you'd be surprised how often you'd go into attack with something that's weaker, like Moogle or Barbaricia, and your opponent's less inclined to want to stop you because you have a Dancer on the board. And I actually really loved Dancer when Opus 1 was a thing, but I never really played it very much because of it being an odd-costed backup that didn't have an come into play effect, but in this deck it actually works very, very well. Then lastly we have 1 copy of Maria. A lot of people hoard their Marias, and therefore I thought that only 1 copy of it made a lot of sense in this deck, because it's nice to have it, but you don't necessarily need it because you're just getting rid of everything on the board, and only having to find 1 copy of it is actually quite easy. And then going into the summons and the monsters, I've decided to go with Odins across the board because Odins are very, very easy to pick up and they're still useful to this day. The 4-drop Odin is less useful than he used to be, but he has 1 very, very major niche. And the reason that I want to go into that is because we're running Dragon as well. Dragon on paper is strictly a better card than Odin because it's something you can pay in lieu later on. Like you can pay it in arrears, you pay 2 to put it in and then 2 to kill something later. But there's one thing that it doesn't deal with that Odin does, and that's Emperor. And Emperor is another kind of card that you want to bear in mind when you build a lot of decks, and this one is included because you have a lot of activated abilities like Ishtola, like Dancer, things like that, Black Mage. There's loads of activated abilities. You have plenty of outs to Emperor in this deck through Al Cid, through, him, if they're silly enough to block it, you block your Moogles or anything like that, you can kill it with Orlando. There's loads of outs you have to it, but I thought that, having an Odin in there as well as the dragons kind of allows you to kind of make sure you keep it in mind, because you do ultimately get the same thing, and it's something you'll play in your opponent's turn where you can't play it in, your opponent's turn, say you draw it off a Moogle or something like that. And then the monsters, you have 2 dragons in here. One of them does come out for the Legends later, and then we have 3 Cactuar, which is honestly one of my favourite cards in Opus 4. It's a damage enabler for the entire deck. It does very, very well at that. It's extra chip damage, and you can treat it as though it's like extra power on your forwards. Like say you're attacking with a Moogle and they block it with a 7k guy, they're not going to want to block it anymore if you have a Cactuar on board because you'll have enough damage to kill it. And then not only that, but the 10,000 needles in effect that it has. And let me just say, one of my favourite things about Final Fantasy TCG as a Final Fantasy nut job is how right they get the flavour of these things. It has 1,000 needles and it has 10,000 needles, but 10,000 needles is much harder to pull off, and I love that. And you'd be surprised, if you're about to get attacked by somebody and you're going to take damage anyway, then there aren't that many EX bursts in this deck. If you ever turn over an Odin, yes, it's going to suck, it's going to be awful, but the likelihood of that happening isn't very high, so if you want to kind of get rid of something on the way to dealing you damage, then this card can actually do you wonders. Now, if we wanted to change this deck up to include some legends in there, you actually don't need all that many. I like to include a single copy of Emperor in this deck because it means that you can ward off aggressors like fire decks that use red mage, so that you have the time to be able to get the backups down to be able to play some of your cards. And it also allows, in combination with Sena, makes it so that it's very, very difficult for your opponent to move much. It's really, really good, and I think that in this deck it suits it very, very well. And then 2 copies of Onion Knight is what I would replace Ishtola for, because Onion Knight in this deck does absolute wonders. It's a damage enabler, it's a cheap, it mitigates its own cost by picking up another Onion Knight, which is a card you'll be playing anyway in any Lightning deck, and that's why I like it so much. You can kill things with just it and the Onion Knight you pick up as well by attacking with it. If you give it haste with Red Mage, you can play it, deal 3k to something, attack with it, deal another 3k to something, and then use his S ability with the Onion Knight you just picked up, switch him for the other Onion Knight, and then deal a further 5k to something because they've already been damaged, and that's a 10k damage. That's a lot for what is essentially 6 CP, and you still end up with a board or the guy on the board because you're paying 4 CP for the Onion Knight itself, but you're making 2 of it back, and then you discard the Onion Knight you picked up to go and change it. In fact, that's only 4 CP, so that's actually even better, and you're dealing 10k to something. That's a lot. So, and then past that, I think that changing one of the dragons to a Raiden means that you can have that late game push where or if you're getting battered around the head, you can just go the get off me button, or if you're about to win and your opponent has a bit of a wall up, having the ability to remove something from the game like Renoa or Golbez is always very, very nice. So those are the 4 legends that I would put in here, and you can see how the deck list changes just on my right here. And then if you wanted to carry on getting into the game like that, then you can feel free to change it however you want, because one of the great things about this game is the fact that it's very, very well balanced, generally speaking, so there's a lot of wiggle room here. Like I said, go get some fat chocobos, go get all these different things, go and get legendary lightning. There's lots of little ways that you can change this deck to your needs. But I wanted to build this deck the way that I have so that I can demonstrate that it doesn't actually cost all that much money if you don't want it to in order to play this game. And that's it for this deck list here. So thank you very, very much for watching, and I hope that this has enabled you to have a deck list that you can show to your friends or anything like that that are interested in getting into the game. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We'll be giving you plenty of Final Fantasy TCG content as well as more Final Fantasy content in general. I've got some wonderful plans coming up this year that I'm hoping to come to fruition very, very soon, including Dissidia, Brave Exvius, and lots of other little pieces. So there's a lot going on this year for my channel here. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll speak to you guys soon. See you later.